I'm ready.
Okay, so this is Square, and he's going off to college soon, and he's very excited to meet new people. And very soon, he made a bunch of new friends. But then he realized that he wasn't quite the same as his friends, and he really wanted to fit in, so he decided to be a circle too. Have any of you ever felt the need to change your behavior in order to fit into a group? I know I have. Well, we've been taught about peer pressure and whatnot since a very young age, but it wasn't until I took a psychology class in high school that I really learned about this topic. This is also known as conformity. As Lego has stated in an article from Science Direct about conformity in children, conformity is defined to be the act of altering one's behavior to be in line with the majority. So in today's speech, I'm going to explain why conformity happens, how it relates to us through some of the very well-known experiments, Ash et al. And the Stanford Prison Experiment. So, why does this happen? Well, as humans, we are very social creatures. We have a need to talk to other humans and interact with other humans. According to an article about social identity from published this year in the Journal of Experiment Psychology, there's a theory called social identity theory. And according to this theory, as humans, we have a need to understand who we are based on our social context. In this theory, it says that we will have multiple social selves relating to each of our different group memberships. And what this means is that, well, for example, if someone was in a frat and a football team, they will have a different version of their social self associated with each of these groups. And then they will each shape that person's identity and the way he behaves differently. As humans, we also have a tendency to use our group memberships for our self-esteem. Because of this, we have a tendency to view the traits from the group we're in to be more positive than others. This is a bias that is included when we use these group memberships for self-esteem. So since we see these traits to be better, and we really want to fit into the groups, this is when conformity happens. According to an article by Vanden Bosch published in 2015 in the Frontiers of Psychology, one of the very well-known experiments done on this topic is done by Ash et al. In 1956. And in this experiment, the participants were shown two papers like this with lines on it, and they were asked to identify which of the three lines is the same length as this other line. The answer seems to be a very obvious one, right? Well, but they were trying to investigate how people will conform to group pressure. So they had the participants be in a room with these different actors that pretended to be participants, and they would give incorrect answers. So for example, they would say that the line 2 will be the same length as this line. And that's obviously very not true. But then the actors will give their answers first. So when it was the participants' turn to answer, they will be very confused. As a result, up to 40% of the participants actually ended up conforming to the group pressure and agreeing with the wrong answers that everyone else gave. In an interview afterwards, the participants have stated that when in this situation, they started to doubt their own answers, and they thought that maybe they had misunderstood the task or something, and also they just didn't want to go against the group. And that's why they ended up conforming. Similarly, a different experiment done to investigate how people conform to social roles is the Stanford Prison Experiment. As Zainis has stated in an article on how this decade-old experiment is still significant to the future of psychology, this experiment is a very controversial one. In this experiment, they converted a basement in Stanford into a mock prison. They gathered Stanford students to be participants and assigned them random roles of either a guard or a prisoner. Just 6 days later, the experimenters were forced to stop the experiment because, one, the prisoners were having way too many emotional breakdowns, and the guards were being too extensively aggressive. And everything was just absolute chaos, and they had to stop it way before they intended to. The fact that the participants so readily assumed their roles that they were assigned shows how humans are likely to conform to the social roles that we're expected to be in. They acted in a way that they believe that prisoners and guards would act in a real situation. However, this experiment is known to be a very questionable one because of the inherent bias that happened because the participants were aware that they were in an experiment. So some psychologists argue that this gave it bias and the results are not reliable since they were just acting in a way that they thought the researchers wanted them to. But I think that the fact that they changed their behavior and to be the way that they believe that the participants should be is also an example of how they conform to the social role of a participant. Because humans are very irrational and we have different personalities, theories and models in psychology can't be uniformly applied to everyone. There are factors such as culture, age, and environmental factors that will affect how things apply in real life. So in this case, the type of the group, the size of the majority group, and the cultural factors of the individual that's being looked at all affect the degree that they will conform to. This was discussed in depth in the chapter on conformity in the book Social Influences by Kevin Wren in 1999. He argued that since humans are inconsistent, conformity is inconsistent as well. So, why is this relevant to us today? Well, today we're in the world where media and technology are advancing at a very fast rate. We are constantly being immersed in information, and we're always being exposed to different social norms and what the majority is. There are ideas and information being disseminated everywhere at a very fast rate. And since as humans we have it's a part of our nature to be vulnerable to social influences, I believe that it's important to be aware of the power of that these influences have on us. And conformity isn't a bad thing, but we wouldn't want to completely lose sight of who we are because of it, like the square did in the beginning of the speech. Thank you.
Sophia, how did that go?
I feel like compared to the previous speeches, I was less nervous, and I felt more comfortable using gestures and making eye contact with people, since it was like a research topic, and I felt like I knew about it.
Yeah. Have you heard of? I think it's called Eye of the Storm. Is the name? It was an experiment that speaks just to this. A woman right after Martin Luther King was shot, she made collars, and so what she did was she divided her third grade class, and if you had blue or green eyes, you had to wear a collar, and the collar signified that you were African American, and so you had to sit in the back of the class, and you couldn't drink from the water fountain, and you couldn't play on the playground, and then halfway through the week she flipped it so that the brown eyes then had to wear the collars and whatnot. And same sorts of things that happened, sort of that notion of conformity and being the role that I have, that I can play, right, had a really significant impact on these kids, because they went back and 20 years later they actually videotaped the kids, and they said that so profoundly impacted my perception of race relations that I treat everybody. It just completely changed the way they treated people, and significantly different than other people in their community. Catastrophically different. So check it out.
Okay.
Yeah, she's still around. I saw her interviewed recently, within the last 5 years or something. So, but anyway, okay. Audience, if you could, comments.
I just thought you did like a really excellent job with your delivery. Like I could tell that you were really well versed in the subject, and you were also really passionate about it. And I also really liked the square and circle thing was really cute.
Thank you.
I just thought you did a really good job.
I really liked like the Stanford experience that you talked about, because I've heard about that before. So, and then also like an example you gave earlier, I related to. So I thought it was really interesting.
It was interesting with the Stanford experience that you were talking about, is you were talking about how the participants, like they knew they were being observed, but then they conformed even more, and just like even more to your point. I thought that was an interesting take on it.
I thought it was pretty effective how you said like you took a psychology class earlier, so you gave yourself credibility at the beginning. That's good.
Okay, Sophia, a few things to know. First of all, the example on the board I think was okay. I would say let's try not to use the board. Let's kind of have our visual aid done in advance. I like the fact that you used the ashes line experiment. Moscovici furthered that with the blue-green dots. I don't know if you read about that, but same sort of findings. Kind of crazy with like, okay, yeah. So a few things. First of all, structurally, you laid out, you established your credibility nicely. I think you got our attention and you gave us a reason to listen in terms of conformity. I might have gone just even a tad bit farther and asked us or questioned, looked at like the audience demographics in terms of the groups that people associate with here on campus, sort of you begin to identify with, right? And so you can make that really clear connection, right? Even like maybe mentioning a couple, 2 or 3 of them, you know, as just another way to kind of loop those in that might not be, might not think that they're, whatever. Okay. Liked your credibility statement. Heard what you were going to be talking about. I thought you did a nice job of talking about sort of conceptually what conformity is, and then giving really clear examples of that in the literature in terms of those theoretical frames. I thought you laid those out really nicely, and sort of talking about what does that mean for us? Sort of what's the significance of it? So to be really thoughtful about how you behave, and what you change and what you don't change. So I thought you did that well. I thought in terms of your eye contact and your conversational quality, I thought that was really strong. I mean, every time I read something down, every time I looked back up, you were still looking at us, and you were looking everywhere, and you were poised, and you just had a really nice flow to your conversation. It felt really conversational. It felt like, it almost felt like you were just giving us kind of a little lecturette on it, which, has kind of it has a nice feel to it. That's a comfortable feeling that we can kind of all relate to, and covered in some good examples to illustrate your point and whatnot. I said let's stay away from the board. I heard your citations and used a nice variety of those. What I also would note was that you peppered them throughout your speech, so they didn't all come in one little place, right? But you actually did a nice job. The only thing I would say is I would probably go back to the original articles that have been written. Ash's original work, the Stanford experiment original work, and cite those, because those you should be able to find in the library database pretty easily. So I would probably go back to those as opposed to citing somebody else that's cited them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. That just like makes you sound that much more impressive. All righty?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.